Lightning tore across the Manhattan skyline like a knife through silk. Inside the obstetrics wing of Mount Sinai's most exclusive private suite, Jonathan Hale pressed his palms against the observation window so hard his knuckles turned white. Rain hammered the glass in sheets, distorting the city lights below into a watercolor blur of gold and red. He could hear muffled voices behind the delivery room doors, urgent and clipped, the kind of controlled panic that comes when doctors realize they're losing control. Let's make the comments section interactive. Are you watching from Chicago, Atlanta, New York, Dubai, London, Japan, Paris, Toronto, Niagara Falls, or any part of the world? Let us know in the comments section. Please give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. He'd bought this entire floor, $23 million, to ensure his wife had the best care money could secure. The finest obstetricians, the most advanced equipment, nurses who were paid more than most surgeons. Jonathan Hale didn't believe in taking chances. He'd built Hale Industries from a failing steel mill into a global empire worth $42 billion by eliminating variables, by controlling outcomes, by refusing to accept the word impossible. But tonight, he was learning a truth that would shatter him. Some things cannot be bought. The double doors burst open. A surgeon emerged, mask hanging loose around his neck, eyes hollow. Jonathan's heart stopped before the man even spoke. "Mr. Hale, I'm so sorry." 3 words. That's all it took to end the world. Elizabeth was gone. His Elizabeth, who laughed like music, who had somehow convinced him that life was more than quarterly earnings and hostile takeovers. Elizabeth, who had made him believe in something beyond himself. She had given birth to their daughter and, with her last breath, whispered a name he could barely hear, Emily. Jonathan stood frozen as they wheeled the incubator past him. Inside lay a tiny creature wrapped in white hospital blankets, impossibly small, impossibly fragile. Dark wisps of hair crowned her head. She had Elizabeth's delicate nose, her perfect lips, his daughter, his heir, the future of everything he'd built. He leaned over the transparent bassinet, searching for some connection, some recognition. "Emily," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Emily, sweetheart, can you see me?" The newborn's eyes were open, deep blue and unfocused. She blinked once, then again, her tiny face scrunching. But her gaze didn't track his movement, didn't follow his voice. She stared past him, through him at something he couldn't see, or perhaps at nothing at all. A pediatric neurologist appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Hale, we need to run some tests. There may be complications." Jonathan barely heard him. He was staring at his daughter, at those beautiful, empty eyes, and feeling the first cold tendrils of a horror that would consume the next 3 years of his life. That night, as thunder rolled across the city and rain hammered the hospital windows, Jonathan Hale made a promise to the tiny girl sleeping in the incubator. He spoke it aloud to the empty room, to his absent wife, to God or fate or whoever might be listening. "I will find a way to make you see, my love. Even if it costs everything I have. Even if it costs everything I am." The lightning flashed again, illuminating his face in stark white relief. He looked like a man preparing for war. He had no idea how completely he would lose. 3 years passed in a hemorrhage of hope and money. Jonathan Hale became a ghost in his own company, delegating board meetings, missing product launches, letting lieutenants handle acquisitions while he chased miracles across continents. London's Moorfields Eye Hospital, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, a clinic in Dubai where a Saudi prince's son had supposedly regained sight through experimental stem cell therapy, a facility in Tokyo pioneering nerve regeneration. Each time, the consultation began with hope. Each time, it ended the same way. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. The optic nerve damage is too extensive. There's nothing we can do. Perhaps in 5 years, 10 years, research might advance. Have you considered teaching her to live without sight? There are excellent schools. Jonathan would stand in those sterile corridors, Italian leather shoes clicking on polished floors, his Brioni suits impeccable, his face carved from stone. Inside, he was dying by degrees. Emily grew. At 3 years old, she was a beautiful child with her mother's features and her father's stubborn chin. She crawled toward sounds instead of sights, her small hands outstretched, feeling her way through a world of perpetual darkness. She carried a stuffed elephant everywhere, its gray fabric worn soft from constant touching, one ear nearly loved off. She called it Trumpet, and it was her anchor in the void. The Hale penthouse transformed. Jonathan hired architects to rebuild his home into a padded kingdom for a blind princess. Every sharp corner rounded. Rails installed along every wall. Carpets thick enough to cushion any fall. He employed a nanny, Melissa, a kind woman from Ireland with infinite patience and a voice like warm honey. She sang to Emily constantly, teaching her to navigate by sound and touch. "She's adapting beautifully," Melissa would tell him. "She's a bright little thing, sir. Happy, even." But Jonathan couldn't see it. When he looked at his daughter, he saw only what was missing. He saw Elizabeth's eyes, which had sparkled with life, replaced by Emily's vacant stare. He saw his failure, crystallized in the form of a 3-year-old who would never see a sunset, never recognize her father's face, never watch her own wedding or see her children born. The guilt was an anchor dragging him into darker waters every day. At night, he would sit beside her bed after Melissa had tucked her in, reading her stories from picture books she couldn't see. He described the colors in exhaustive detail, as if words could paint vision into her mind. "The ocean is blue, sweetheart, deep blue like sapphires, and when the sun hits it just right, it sparkles with 1,000 tiny diamonds of light. Pretty?" Emily would murmur sleepily, her sightless eyes closing. "Tell me more, Daddy." He would continue until she slept, his voice hoarse, describing a world she would never experience, trying to fill the darkness with his words, knowing it would never be enough. Business rivals began to circle. Whispers spread through the boardroom that Jonathan Hale had gone soft, that grief had broken the Iron King of Wall Street. Stock prices fluctuated. Hostile takeover attempts began. Jonathan crushed them mechanically, without the fire that had once made him legendary. His heart wasn't in it anymore. His heart was in a penthouse bedroom, holding the hand of a little girl who lived in shadows. If Jonathan Hale's world had contracted to a point of obsessive focus, another world had collapsed entirely. On the other side of Manhattan, beneath a graffiti-streaked overpass near the meatpacking district, a woman who no longer remembered her own name sat on a flattened cardboard box, humming tunelessly to herself. People called her Rose, or the crazy lady, or nothing at all. Children would sometimes throw coins into her dented coffee can, laughing as they ran away. Teenagers recorded her for social media clicks. Most people simply stepped around her, eyes averted, another piece of urban furniture to be ignored. None of them knew that 5 years earlier, she had been Dr. Janet Miller, one of the most celebrated pediatric ophthalmologists in the world. Hospitals had competed for her time. She'd performed surgeries that other surgeons deemed impossible, restoring sight to children who'd been written off as hopeless cases. Medical journals published her techniques. Parents wept with gratitude in her office. Then came the night that ended everything. She'd been driving home from a conference in Boston, exhausted but happy. Her husband David sat in the passenger seat, talking about their daughter Sophie's upcoming piano recital. Sophie, 8 years old, brilliant and kind, was asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. The drunk driver ran the red light at 60 miles an hour. David and Sophie died instantly. Janet survived with minor injuries, physically. But when she woke in the hospital and learned what had happened, something inside her simply stopped. She refused to speak, refused to eat, refused to acknowledge the world that had taken everything from her. Colleagues tried to help. Friends tried to reach her. Eventually, they gave up. Within 6 months, she'd lost her medical license for abandoning her practice. Within a year, her savings evaporated into medical bills and funeral costs she couldn't process. Within 18 months, she was on the streets, another invisible casualty of grief. But even homeless, even broken, even stripped of everything she'd been, Dr. Janet Miller retained one gift. She could read eyes like other people read books. She would watch people pass by and see their stories written in their gazes. The businessman with the nervous glance was hiding something. The teenager with the distant stare was high. The mother with the frantic eyes was afraid for her child. Eyes spoke a language deeper than words, and Janet understood every syllable. Sometimes she would find her reflection in puddles or store windows and stare at her own eyes, trying to recognize the woman she'd been. But that woman was gone. Only Rose remained, the ghost who watched the world through eyes that had seen too much. One morning, she spoke to a stray cat limping past her cardboard home. "You see more than anyone in this city, don't you?" The cat blinked slowly, deliberately, and somehow that simple gesture felt more honest than any conversation she'd had in years. The Tuesday that changed everything began like any other in the chaos of Manhattan's Lower East Side. Vendors shouted prices in half a dozen languages. Cars honked in aggressive harmony. The smell of roasted nuts mixed with garbage, exhaust fumes, and the peculiar electric scent of a city fully awake. Rose sat near a fruit stand, her coffee can empty, tracing patterns in the dirt with one finger. She'd stopped trying to panhandle. Most days, she just existed, watching the endless flow of humanity, reading the eyes of people who would never read hers. Then she heard it. A child's giggle, high and delicate, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Careful now, Emily. Don't go too far." The voice belonged to a woman, middle-aged, Irish accent, full of protective warmth and barely concealed anxiety. Rose's head lifted. Through the crowd, she saw them. A nanny pushing a stroller with a little girl walking alongside, holding the woman's hand. The child moved strangely, her steps tentative, her free hand outstretched, feeling the air. Her eyes were open, wide and beautiful, but unfocused, tracking nothing. Blind, Rose thought automatically. Then the child turned her face toward the sun, and something made Rose freeze. Flash. A brief, brilliant reflection, white against the iris, lasting only a fraction of a second. Rose's heart slammed against her ribs. Every instinct from her former life screamed to attention. That wasn't optic nerve damage. That was light scattering off an opacity in the lens. That was a congenital cataract, rare and often misdiagnosed, but entirely, completely, miraculously curable. "Oh my God!" Rose whispered, staggering to her feet. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" The crowd flowed around her, oblivious. The nanny was turning away, guiding the child down the sidewalk. "Wait!" Rose shouted, her voice cracking from disuse. "Wait! Stop!" Melissa turned, instinctively pulling Emily closer. The homeless woman was lurching toward them, eyes wild, hands reaching out. "Stay back," Melissa commanded, fear sharp in her voice. "Please." Rose grabbed for the words, for sanity, for anything that would make this woman listen. "Please listen to me. Your child, this little girl, she's not blind from nerve damage. I saw the reflection. I know what it means. She has cataracts. She can be cured." A crowd was gathering now, phones rising, recording. Someone laughed. A vendor shook his head. Crazy woman. Always something with her. I'm a doctor, Rose screamed, hearing the desperation in her own voice, knowing how insane she must sound. I was a doctor. Please, you have to believe me. Melissa was backing away now. Emily clutched against her chest, the child's face confused and frightened. Stay away from us. I'm calling the police. Rose stumbled forward, reaching, and then a hand caught her shoulder, spinning her around. A security guard from one of the nearby shops. That's enough, lady. Move along. You don't understand, Rose sobbed, fighting against his grip. That child can see. She just needs surgery, The sharp screech of tires cut through the noise. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows had stopped in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out. Even from a distance, even in her shattered state, Rose recognized him. Everyone in New York would recognize Jonathan Hale. The billionaire's face was leaner than in the magazine photos, his eyes harder, but there was no mistaking him. He was staring directly at her. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the billionaire and the beggar simply looked at each other across the chaos of the street. Two souls broken by loss, standing on opposite sides of fortune's vast divide. Then Jonathan Hale began walking toward her, and Rose knew with absolute certainty that both their lives were about to change forever. Who are you? Jonathan's voice was cold, controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to authority. Rose's throat was tight. I know you, Mr. Hale. I know your daughter. That's her, isn't it? She pointed to where Melissa stood frozen, Emily still in her arms. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Answer my question. My name was Dr. Janet Miller. The words came out broken, rusty. I was a pediatric ophthalmologist. One of the best. Before everything fell apart. Recognition sparked in a few faces around them. An older woman gasped. Janet Miller? Oh my God. I thought she was dead. Jonathan studied her face, and Rose saw him taking in the details. The sunburned skin, the tangled hair, the clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks. She saw him connecting the legendary surgeon with the broken woman before him, and she watched his expression shift from suspicion to something more complex. You're the one who saved the Morrison girl, he said quietly. 10 years ago, the case was in all the medical journals. Yes. Rose straightened slightly, finding fragments of her old self. Bilateral retinal detachment. Everyone said it was impossible, but I could see what they couldn't. And now you're homeless, broken, insane according to most people. She met his eyes directly. But I can still see what others miss, Mr. Hale. And I saw your daughter's eyes. Every specialist you've consulted has told you she has permanent optic nerve damage, haven't they? His jaw tightened. How do you know that? Because that's what they always say when they're afraid to operate. When the condition is rare enough, risky enough, that they'd rather write it off as hopeless than take the chance. Rose stepped closer, urgent. Your daughter doesn't have dead optic nerves. She has bilateral congenital cataracts, probably nuclear cataracts, dense enough to block almost all light perception. But the nerves beneath are alive, Mr. Hale. She can be cured. The crowd had gone silent. Phones were still recording. Somewhere, someone was already uploading this to social media, but Rose didn't care. This moment was all that mattered. Jonathan's face had gone pale. You're saying 3 years. 3 years of specialists, of tests, of hospitals around the world, and they all missed it. They didn't want to see it. Pediatric cataract surgery on someone misdiagnosed for years is incredibly risky. If something goes wrong, If the surgery fails, their reputations are destroyed. It's easier to say it's nerve damage, to say it's hopeless, to send you away. Rose's voice grew stronger. But I've performed this surgery. I've restored sight to children in worse conditions. I know I can help her. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment. Behind him, his driver was speaking urgently into a phone. Melissa stood uncertain, torn between protecting Emily and wanting to hear more. The little girl had gone quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Finally, Jonathan spoke. Prove it. What? Prove that you're right and every other doctor I've consulted is wrong. One test. One examination. If you're lying, if you're wrong, if this is some con, then you'll never see me again, Rose finished. I understand. He nodded sharply. My jet leaves in 2 hours. Can you be ready? Rose looked down at herself, at the cardboard box that was her home, at the coffee can with its handful of coins. Everything she owned could fit in her pockets. I'm ready now. Then let's go. He turned toward the SUV, then paused. And Dr. Miller? If you're right about this, if you can give my daughter her sight, I'll give you back everything you've lost. Rose felt tears burning her eyes for the first time in years. I don't want everything back. I just want to help one more child see. Then we understand each other. They climbed into the SUV, leaving the stunned crowd behind. As the vehicle pulled away, Rose caught her reflection in the tinted window. For just a moment, she saw not the broken homeless woman, but the shadow of the surgeon she'd once been. Maybe that woman wasn't as dead as she'd thought. The private jet cut through clouds like a knife through water, smooth and silent. Rose sat across from Jonathan in a leather seat that probably cost more than her entire medical school tuition. Someone had given her a coat to cover her ragged clothes. Emily sat beside Melissa, playing with trumpet, humming softly to herself. Tell me exactly what you saw, Jonathan said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Rose leaned forward. When Emily turned toward the sun, light hit her eyes at a specific angle. For just a moment, I saw a white reflection, like a bright flash deep in the lens. That's called leukocoria, and it's diagnostic of several conditions, including nuclear cataracts. The fact that both eyes showed the same response suggests bilateral cataracts, probably congenital. In English, there's something clouding the lens of both her eyes, blocking light from reaching the retina. But the retina itself, the optic nerve, the visual cortex, all of it is likely intact and functional. She's not blind because the hardware is broken. She's blind because something is blocking the signal. Jonathan's hands were clenched on the armrests. How did no one see this? Congenital cataracts in infants are usually obvious, white pupils in photos, that sort of thing. But nuclear cataracts can be denser in the center with clearer edges. In dim light, when the pupil is dilated, some light gets through around the edges. The child can detect brightness, maybe shapes, just enough to make doctors think there's some nerve function. But in reality, the cataracts are so dense that functional vision is impossible. And you're certain? Rose met his eyes. I need to examine her properly. But yes, I'm certain enough to stake everything on it. 20 minutes later, they landed at a private airfield in Connecticut. A helicopter was waiting to take them to Yale New Haven Hospital, where Jonathan's money had purchased immediate access to their ophthalmology department. Dr. Richard Harlan was waiting in the examination room, a thin man in his 50s with silver hair and an expression of barely concealed irritation. Rose recognized him immediately. He'd been at a conference she'd attended once, had been dismissive of her techniques, called her work unnecessarily risky. His expression when he saw her was a mixture of shock and disdain. Jonathan, who is this? Someone who sees what you missed, Jonathan replied coldly. Dr. Harlan's face flushed. I don't know what she's told you, but I stand by my diagnosis. Your daughter has optic nerve hypoplasia. Surgery won't help because there's nothing to fix. Then you won't mind if we run one more test, Rose said quietly. The examination room was pristine, equipped with the latest diagnostic tools. Rose washed her hands carefully, the ritual so familiar it brought tears to her eyes. How long since she'd done this? How long since she'd been allowed to practice medicine? Emily sat in the examination chair, confused but trusting. Rose knelt beside her, speaking softly. Emily. My name is Rose. I'm going to look at your eyes with a special light. Okay? It might be bright, but it won't hurt. Okay, Emily whispered. Rose used a handheld ophthalmoscope, adjusting the light intensity. She examined Emily's right eye first, looking through the pupil toward the retina. What she saw made her heart race. There, clearly visible, was a dense nuclear cataract, almost pearl-like in appearance, blocking the central visual axis. But around the edges, the lens was clearer. And beyond it, oh God, beyond it, she could see healthy retinal blood vessels and intact optic nerve head. Sweet Jesus, she whispered. I was right. She moved to the left eye. Same thing. Dense central cataracts, clear enough periphery to explain why the child could detect light, healthy structures behind the opacity. Rose straightened, turning to Dr. Harlan. His face had gone white. He'd been watching on the connected monitor. Impossible, he whispered. We tested for cataracts. We would have seen. You tested for typical cataracts, Rose interrupted. These are nuclear cataracts, dense in the center but with some peripheral clarity. In a newborn with undeveloped vision, you probably tested for light perception, saw some response, and assumed the nerve was partially functional. You never looked deep enough. Never considered this specific variant. Jonathan had moved beside her, staring at the monitor. What does this mean? It means, Rose said, her voice shaking, that your daughter can be cured. With surgery, we can remove the cataracts, implant artificial lenses, and restore her vision. It won't be perfect immediately. Her brain has never learned to process visual information, so there will be therapy involved. But yes, Mr. Hale, Emily can see. The room went silent. Then Jonathan Hale, the man who'd never shown weakness, who'd built an empire through sheer force of will, sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. Thank you, he whispered. Oh God, thank you. Dr. Harlan had backed toward the door, his face a mask of humiliation and anger. This is highly irregular. Dr. Miller's license was revoked. She can't possibly. Get out, Jonathan said quietly, not looking up. You're fired. Security will escort you from the building. As Harlan was led away, protesting, Jonathan looked up at Rose. Can you do the surgery? Rose felt her old confidence rising, phoenix-like, from the ashes of her grief. Yes, but I'll need my license reinstated, a qualified surgical team, and prep time. This isn't simple, Mr. Hale. The cataracts have been present since birth. The surgery will be delicate, and there are risks. Name them. Infection, hemorrhage, retinal detachment, glaucoma. In the worst case, the surgery could leave her with even less vision than she has now. And there's no guarantee her brain will adapt to visual input after 3 years of blindness. Success rate, Rose considered. For the surgery itself, in experienced hands, maybe 85% for significant vision improvement. For full, normal vision with therapy, maybe 60%. Jonathan nodded slowly. Better odds than I've had in 3 years. What do you need? Time. Team I can trust. And you need to understand, I haven't practiced in 5 years. I'm not the surgeon I was. Yes, you are. He stood, and there was iron in his voice again. You never stopped being that surgeon, Dr. Miller. You just forgot for a while. Now, let's get to work. Over the next 6 weeks, Rose experienced a resurrection. Jonathan's lawyers worked miracles, getting her medical license reinstated under an emergency provision. A judge reviewed her case, saw that she'd never been formally accused of malpractice, only of abandoning her practice, and granted provisional reinstatement pending a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation was brutal. Rose sat in a therapist's office, talking about David and Sophie for the first time in 5 years, crying until there were no tears left. But she also talked about why she'd become a surgeon, about the joy of giving sight to children, about the gift of watching parents see their child see them for the first time. "Do you feel capable of performing surgery again?" the psychiatrist asked. "I don't know," Rose answered honestly. "But I know I have to try. This child deserves every chance I can give her." She was cleared. Jonathan moved Rose into a guest suite in his penthouse, a space larger than the apartment she'd once owned. The first night, she stood in front of a mirror and barely recognized herself. Clean, with new clothes, hair cut and styled, she looked human again. But inside, she still felt like Rose the homeless woman, like an imposter playing dress-up in someone else's life. Melissa was kind but cautious. Emily, sensing someone new in her world, was curious and clingy. One evening, Rose sat with her in the playroom, describing colors. "What's blue like?" Emily asked. Rose thought carefully. "Blue is cool. It's the color of calm. It's what water looks like when it's deep and still. It's what the sky looks like on a perfect day." "I want to see blue," Emily whispered. "You will, sweetheart," Rose promised. Very soon, she assembled a surgical team, calling in favors from her past life, bringing together the best pediatric anesthesiologist, the finest surgical nurses, a team that understood the stakes. They practiced on models, reviewed the latest techniques, prepared for every contingency. But Rose also did something else. Late at night, when the penthouse was quiet, she would go to the room Jonathan had set aside as a shrine to Elizabeth. Photos lined the walls, Elizabeth laughing, Elizabeth on their wedding day, Elizabeth pregnant and glowing. "I don't know if you can hear me," Rose would whisper to the photos, "but I'm going to try to give your daughter something you never got to see. Her first real look at the world. I'll do everything I can. I promise." She thought of Sophie, of David, of the life she'd lost. Maybe she couldn't save them, but maybe, just maybe, she could save this one little girl. The night before the surgery, Jonathan found Rose standing in his study, looking out at the city lights. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "A million of them," she admitted. "Jonathan, I need you to understand. I'm going to do everything right, everything by the book, everything I know how to do. But surgery is never guaranteed. Things can go wrong. If they do, you'll have tried," he interrupted gently. "That's more than anyone else was willing to do. That's more than I could give her myself." He paused. "Janet, why did you stay on the streets? Why didn't you fight to get back?" She was quiet for a long time. "Because I didn't think I deserved to come back. I let my family die. I was supposed to protect them, and I failed. What right did I have to keep saving other people's children when I couldn't save my own? It wasn't your fault. I know that here." She touched her head. "But not here." Her hand moved to her heart. "Emily's given me something I never thought I'd have again. A reason to try. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm grateful for that." Jonathan nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think Elizabeth would have liked you. She always said the best people are the broken ones who keep trying anyway." The morning of the surgery dawned clear and cold. The operating room at Yale New Haven had been reserved, prepped, sterilized to perfection. Rose scrubbed in, the familiar ritual centering her, bringing her back to who she'd been before the tragedy. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She'd expected them to shake, expected fear to overwhelm her. Instead, she felt only a deep, profound calm. Emily was brought in, sedated but not yet fully under. Rose leaned over her, speaking softly. "I'm going to take care of you, sweetheart. When you wake up, the world is going to be so much brighter. Promise." Emily mumbled, already drowsy. "Promise." In the observation room, Jonathan pressed his hands against the glass, his face pale. Melissa stood beside him, gripping his arm. The surgery would take hours, and there were no guarantees. The anesthesiologist nodded. Emily slipped into unconsciousness. Rose picked up the first instrument, a microscopic blade, and made her opening incision with the precision of an artist painting a masterpiece. The surgery was a study in controlled precision. Every movement measured, every cut exact. Rose worked with 2 surgical microscopes, magnifying Emily's tiny eyes to workable dimensions. She created a small opening in the cornea, carefully entered the anterior chamber of the eye, and began the delicate process of removing the clouded lens. Hours passed. The team worked in synchronized silence, anticipating each other's needs. Rose barely blinked. Her entire world narrowed to the microscopic landscape of Emily's eye. Then, in the middle of the procedure on the second eye, disaster struck. A monitor began beeping urgently. Blood pressure dropping. The anesthesiologist called out. Heart rate increasing. She's going into distress. Rose didn't look up. Talk to me. What's happening? Could be an allergic reaction to the anesthetic. Switching protocols now. The beeping intensified. In the observation room, Jonathan lurched to his feet, terror on his face. Pressure still dropping. Heart rate erratic. Rose's mind raced. She was in the middle of the most delicate part of the surgery. If she stopped now, if she didn't complete the lens removal, Emily could be left worse than before. But if the child's body was crashing, "Give me 2 minutes," Rose said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Just 2 minutes to stabilize this eye." "Janet, we might not have 2 minutes," the anesthesiologist warned. "Then make me have them. I need to finish this." Her hands moved faster, but no less precisely. Years of experience, muscle memory that transcended conscious thought, guided her. She extracted the damaged lens, carefully positioned the artificial replacement, secured it with microscopic sutures. 1 minute, the anesthesiologist counted. Rose's fingers flew. The final sutures, the closing, the sealing. "Done," she announced, stepping back. "She's all yours." The anesthesiologist worked frantically, administering counteragents, adjusting for drips. The team surrounded Emily, working in controlled chaos. And then, slowly, the heart monitor steadied. The blood pressure normalized. The crisis passed. Rose pulled off her surgical mask with shaking hands. For the first time in 5 years, she let herself feel the weight of another person's life in her hands. The terror of almost losing them, the overwhelming relief of pulling them back from the edge. In the observation room, Jonathan collapsed back into his chair, gray-faced and trembling. 6 hours after the surgery began, Rose emerged into the waiting room. Jonathan jumped to his feet, searching her face for answers. "It's done," Rose said simply. "The cataracts are removed. Artificial lenses are in place. She had a reaction to the anesthetic, but we managed it. She's stable now. And her eyes. We won't know for certain until the bandages come off in 72 hours. But structurally, everything looks good. The optic nerves responded to light during the procedure, which is an excellent sign." Jonathan pulled her into a hug before she could react. "Thank you," he whispered fiercely. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Rose stood stiffly for a moment, then slowly returned the embrace. It was the first time in 5 years anyone had hugged her. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed it. The next 3 days were agony. Emily lay in her hospital bed, bandages covering her eyes, confused and frightened. Rose stayed with her almost constantly, singing to her, telling her stories, describing the world she would soon see. Jonathan barely slept. He paced the hospital corridors, worked from his laptop in Emily's room, and stared out windows at a city that suddenly seemed full of impossible hope. On the 3rd day, the bandages came off. The team gathered in Emily's room: Rose, the surgical team, Jonathan, Melissa, and several neurologists who would assess Emily's visual response. Emily sat in her bed, trumpet clutched to her chest, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Ready, sweetheart?" Rose asked gently, her hands trembling as they reached for the bandages. "Will it hurt?" Emily whispered. "Not at all. You might see some bright lights, and that might feel strange, but it won't hurt." Slowly, carefully, Rose unwound the gauze. The room held its breath. The final layer came away. Emily's eyes were slightly swollen, the whites bloodshot, but the pupils were clear, the implanted lenses perfectly positioned. "Emily?" Rose said softly. "Can you open your eyes?" Emily blinked once, twice. Her eyelids fluttered. Then they opened. For a moment, nothing. Emily's eyes moved randomly, unfocused, struggling to make sense of the overwhelming flood of information her brain had never learned to process. Then her gaze found Rose's face. It was like watching a miracle unfold in real time. Emily's eyes widened, her pupils focused. Her brain, plastic and adaptive in the way only a young child's can be, began to make connections, to process, to understand. Colors, shapes, light and shadow. A face, a woman's face with kind eyes and a gentle smile, leaning close to her. "Mama," Emily whispered, reaching out. Rose felt her heart shatter and rebuild itself in the same instant. She thought of Sophie, of the daughter she'd lost, of the guilt that had driven her to the streets. And she understood, finally, that saving this child wasn't betraying her own daughter's memory. It was honoring it. "Yes, sweetheart," Rose whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here." Emily's small hand touched Rose's cheek, exploring this new world of sight and touch together. "You're pretty," she said wonderingly. "Everything's so bright." Then Emily turned her head, and her gaze found Jonathan. He stood frozen by the window, backlit by afternoon sun, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid this moment would shatter like glass. "Daddy," Emily said, her voice full of amazement. "Daddy, I can see you." Jonathan crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed. Emily reached for him, her eyes tracking his movement perfectly, and touched his face with both hands. "You're crying," she observed, fascinated. "Your eyes are wet." "Happy tears," Jonathan managed, his voice breaking. "These are very, very happy tears." Emily looked around the room, her eyes wide with wonder, taking in colors and shapes she'd never imagined. She saw Melissa, saw the doctors, saw the beeping machines and the flowers on the windowsill and the sunlight streaming through the glass. "It's so much," she whispered. "Everything is so much. It will take time for your brain to adjust," Rose explained, wiping her own tears. "Right now, your eyes are sending information that your brain has never processed before. It might feel overwhelming at first, but I promise it gets easier." "What color is Trumpet?" Emily asked, holding up her beloved stuffed elephant. "Gray," Rose said. "A soft gray, like clouds before rain." Emily stared at the toy as if seeing it for the first time, which, in a way, she was. "I love gray," she decided. The room erupted in celebration. The surgical team was crying, hugging each other. Melissa sobbed into her hands. The neurologists were already making notes, documenting what would become one of the most remarkable cases in pediatric ophthalmology. But in the chaos, Rose slipped quietly from the room. She walked down the hospital corridor, past nurses and doctors and visitors, and found herself in a small chapel at the end of the wing. She sat in the front pew, staring at the simple altar, and finally allowed herself to feel everything she'd been holding back for 5 years. She cried for David and Sophie, for the family she'd lost and would never get back, for the years she'd spent on the streets, punishing herself for surviving when they hadn't, for the woman she'd been and the broken shell she'd become. But she also cried with relief, with joy, with the overwhelming sense that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a way to live again. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty chapel, "to God or fate or the universe. Thank you for letting me save one more child." The door opened behind her. Jonathan entered, sitting beside her without speaking. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "You saved her life," he said finally. "You saved mine," Rose replied. "You gave me a reason to come back." "I'm creating a pediatric ophthalmology center," Jonathan said abruptly. "The Elizabeth Hale Center for Pediatric Vision. It will offer cutting-edge surgical treatment, particularly for rare conditions that other hospitals write off as hopeless. And I want you to lead it." Rose turned to look at him, stunned. "Jonathan, you're the best pediatric eye surgeon in the world, Janet. You always were. One tragedy doesn't erase that. And there are hundreds of children out there, maybe thousands, who are living in darkness because doctors are too afraid to try. You can help them. You can save them." "I don't know if I can," Rose whispered. "Yes, you do. You proved it today." He met her eyes. "Emily called you Mama. Did you notice?" "Yes. Elizabeth would have wanted that. She would have wanted our daughter to have someone who loved her, who protected her, who fought for her the way you did." He paused. "You can't replace your daughter, and Emily can't replace Elizabeth. But maybe we can build something new, a different kind of family, one built from broken pieces that somehow fit together." Rose felt fresh tears coming. "I'm still so broken, Jonathan. I still have nightmares. I still wake up thinking I'm back on the streets. I'm not sure I'll ever be whole again." "None of us are whole," Jonathan said quietly. "We're all just doing the best we can with the pieces we have left. But we can do it together." Over the following months, the world watched in amazement as Emily Hale's story unfolded. The media called it the miracle of Manhattan, the blind billionaire's daughter cured by a homeless surgeon. The story had everything: wealth and poverty, tragedy and redemption, a child's sight restored. But the story that mattered happened away from the cameras. Emily's vision therapy was intensive. Her brain had to learn what her eyes were telling it, to process depth perception, to recognize faces, to understand perspective. Rose worked with her daily, patiently teaching her to see. "That's blue," Rose would say, pointing at the sky. "Blue like calm," Emily would repeat, remembering their earlier conversation. "Blue like water." "Exactly. And that's green, like grass, like leaves, like life." The Elizabeth Hale Center opened in downtown Manhattan, a gleaming tower of glass and hope. Rose's office overlooked the city, and sometimes she would stand at the window, staring down at the streets where she'd lived as Rose the homeless woman, marveling at the impossible distance she'd traveled. The center took on the cases no one else would touch. Children with rare genetic conditions, with injuries other surgeons deemed too risky, with situations that seemed hopeless. Rose assembled a team of the best specialists in the world, and together they performed miracles. Not every case succeeded. There were failures, complications, heartbreaks that left Rose awake at night, doubting herself. But there were also triumphs. Children who saw their parents' faces for the first time, teenagers who could finally watch sunsets, babies who would grow up with vision when everyone said it was impossible. The case that became most public, ironically, was the exposure of Dr. Richard Harlan. Investigative journalists dug into his records and found a pattern. Dozens of cases where he'd diagnosed permanent nerve damage without thorough examination, where he'd refused to consider surgical options because the risks were too high for his reputation. He'd known about Emily's cataracts, or at least he'd suspected but hadn't looked closely enough to confirm, because if he'd found them, he would have been obligated to recommend surgery he wasn't skilled enough to perform. The medical board stripped his license. He disappeared from public life, and Rose felt only sadness for him. She understood fear, understood how it could make you choose safety over truth. She'd lived with that fear for 5 years. But she'd also learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing to try anyway. 1 year after Emily's surgery, Jonathan hosted a charity gala at the center. Hundreds of guests attended, including families of children Rose had treated, donors, media, and medical professionals from around the world. The main hall was decorated with children's artwork, pictures drawn by kids who could see because of the center's work. Rose stood at the front of the room, uncomfortable in an evening gown, preparing to give a speech. Emily sat in the front row, wearing a blue dress. "Because blue is my favorite color now, Rose." Holding trumpet, her eyes bright and clear. "A year ago," Rose began, her voice shaking slightly, "I was homeless. I'd lost everything. My family, my career, my sense of self. I spent 5 years on the streets, believing I didn't deserve to be saved. But a little girl and her father taught me something important. We all deserve a chance to see clearly, both literally and metaphorically." She looked directly at Emily. "Emily taught me that healing isn't about forgetting the past or pretending the pain never happened. It's about honoring what we've lost by helping others find what they're looking for. Every child whose sight we restore at this center is a tribute to my daughter Sophie, to Elizabeth Hale, to everyone we've loved and lost. We can't bring back the people we've lost," Rose continued, "but we can make sure their memory lives on in the good we do, the lives we save, the light we bring to others. That's what this center is about. That's what Emily's story is about. It's proof that sometimes the person who saves you is the one you never expected, the one society overlooks, the one sleeping on cardboard, the one everyone else has given up on." She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Heroes don't always wear white coats. Sometimes they're broken. Sometimes they're lost. Sometimes they're sitting on a street corner, forgotten by the world. But they're still there, still capable of miracles, still worthy of a second chance." The applause was thunderous. Emily jumped up and ran to Rose, wrapping her arms around her waist. "I love you, Mama Rose," she said clearly, and the entire room heard it. Rose knelt down, holding Emily close. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." Jonathan joined them on stage, and for a moment, they stood together. This strange, broken, beautiful family that had been built from tragedy and transformed into hope. That night, after the gala ended, after the guests had gone home, after Emily had fallen asleep clutching trumpet, Rose and Jonathan stood on the center's rooftop terrace, looking out at Manhattan's glittering skyline. "Do you ever think about going back?" Jonathan asked. "To the way things were before?" Rose shook her head. "There is no before anymore. That life, that woman, she's gone. This is who I am now. Someone who survived the worst and found a reason to keep going." "Do you still have nightmares?" "Every night," she admitted. "I see the accident. I see Sophie's face. I hear David's voice. But now, when I wake up, I remember where I am. I remember Emily. I remember all the children we've helped. And somehow that makes the darkness bearable." Jonathan nodded slowly. Elizabeth used to say that the only way to survive grief is to transform it into something that helps others. I never understood what she meant until I met you. She was wise. She would have loved you, and Sophie would have been proud of what you've become. Rose felt tears prickling her eyes again. After a year of crying, you'd think she'd have run out of tears. But apparently the supply was endless. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing me when I sounded crazy, for giving me a chance to be a surgeon again. Thank you for giving my daughter the gift of sight, for giving me hope when I'd run out, for showing me that broken people can still create something beautiful." They stood in comfortable silence, two survivors who had found each other in the wreckage and built something worth living for. 5 years later, the Elizabeth Hale Center for Pediatric Vision had treated over 2,000 children from around the world. Rose's techniques were taught in medical schools globally. The center offered scholarships for aspiring pediatric ophthalmologists, mentorship programs, and free treatment for families who couldn't afford it. Emily, now 8 years old, was thriving. She attended a prestigious private school, where she excelled in art. Her paintings were explosions of color that reflected her joy at being able to see the world. She still slept with Trumpet every night, and she still called Rose Mama Rose. With Jonathan's blessing, Rose had moved into a wing of Jonathan's penthouse, not as an employee but as family. She and Melissa had become close friends, bonding over their shared love for Emily. And slowly, painfully, Rose had allowed herself to grieve properly for David and Sophie, working with a therapist to process the trauma she'd buried under years of homelessness and self-destruction. She visited their graves regularly now, bringing flowers, telling them about Emily, about the center, about the children she'd saved. "I hope I'm making you proud," she would whisper to the stones. "I hope you know I never stopped loving you." The nightmares came less frequently. Some nights, Rose even dreamed of happy things, of Emily's laughter, of successful surgeries, of the faces of children seeing clearly for the first time. One afternoon, Rose was in her office reviewing a particularly complex case when her assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Miller? There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Rose looked up, puzzled. "Send her in." A young woman entered, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a manila folder clutched to her chest. "Dr. Miller?"
I'm Sarah Morrison.
"You probably don't remember me, but—" Rose stood up, recognition dawning. "Sarah? The bilateral retinal detachment? You were 8 years old." Sarah's face lit up. "You remember." "Of course I remember. You were supposed to be blind. Everyone said so, but we tried anyway. And you saved my sight." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dr. Miller, I just graduated from medical school. I'm starting my residency in ophthalmology. I want to be like you. I want to save children the way you saved me." Rose felt her breath catch. This was legacy. This was meaning. This was proof that the pain and the struggle and the long years of darkness had led somewhere worth going. "You'll be better than me," Rose said, pulling Sarah into a hug. "You'll be extraordinary." That evening, Rose told Emily and Jonathan about Sarah's visit. They were having dinner together, as they did every night. This chosen family, built from loss and love. "She wants to be like you," Emily said, beaming. "That's because you're amazing, Mama Rose." "I'm just a woman who got a second chance," Rose replied, "and who's trying very hard not to waste it." "You're not wasting it," Jonathan said firmly. "You're changing the world, one child at a time." After dinner, Emily showed Rose her latest painting. A landscape filled with vibrant colors, a sun setting over mountains, a sky gradating from deep blue to brilliant orange. "It's beautiful," Rose breathed. "It's for you," Emily said, "because you gave me colors." You gave me everything. Rose hung the painting in her office the next day, where it caught the morning light and seemed to glow. She would look at it during difficult surgeries, during moments of doubt, during the times when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy to bear. And she would remember, this is why. This is what it's all for. Every child who sees clearly, every family reunited through sight, every moment of wonder when darkness turns to light. This is the purpose that rose from the ashes of her old life. The woman who had been Dr. Janet Miller, who had become Rose the homeless beggar, who had transformed into Mama Rose. She had finally found her way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. Not to the past, but to a future filled with possibility. On the streets of Manhattan, beneath the overpass where Rose once lived, someone had painted a mural. It showed a woman in a white coat, holding a child's hand, both of them looking toward a bright sun. Beneath it, in elegant script, were the words, "Everyone deserves to see clearly. Everyone deserves a second chance." Tourists photographed it. Students studied it. And sometimes, very late at night, Rose would drive by just to look at it, to remember where she'd been and how far she'd come. The city that had once ignored her now celebrated her. But Rose knew the truth. She wasn't special. She was just someone who had survived the darkness and decided to bring light to others who were still lost in it. And that, she had learned, was the most powerful thing any broken person could do. Not to hide their scars, but to use them as proof that healing was possible, that second chances existed, that even in the deepest darkness, light could be found. Emily would grow up knowing this story. She would tell her own children someday about the homeless woman who saved her sight, about the father who never gave up, about the mother she never met but who would have loved her. And maybe, just maybe, she would carry forward the lesson that had saved them all. The person who saves you might be the one you least expect. The hero might be invisible, broken, forgotten. But they're still there, still capable of miracles, still worthy of love. All they need is someone to see them clearly. And sometimes, the act of being seen is the greatest miracle of all.